At exactly 8:06 on a Monday morning, my 42-year-old CEO looked down at his watch, smiled like he'd been waiting for this moment, and said, "Michael, you're 6 minutes late. That's a $500 penalty, or you can clean out your office." 6 hours earlier, I'd closed the biggest contract in our company's 47-year history. For a second, I honestly thought he was joking. I even let out a tired little laugh. Nobody else did. The lobby of Titan Industrial Solutions was unusually full for a Monday morning. Sales managers were carrying coffee cups, engineers were drifting toward the elevators, and a few younger employees stood off to one side whispering to each other. The smell of fresh coffee from the break room mixed with the scent of rain that everyone had tracked in from the parking lot. My CEO, Ethan Brooks, never laughed back. He folded his arms. "I'm serious." I looked at him, then at the digital clock mounted behind the reception desk. 8:06, 6 minutes. That was apparently worth more than 35 years of loyalty. My name is Michael Carter. I'm 59 years old, and until that morning, I'd spent more than half my life working for Titan Industrial Solutions in Dallas. My wife Janet likes to joke that Titan was my second marriage. She wasn't completely wrong. I missed birthdays because of customer emergencies. I answered calls during Thanksgiving dinners. I spent more nights in airport hotels than I care to admit. Somewhere along the way, my job stopped being just a paycheck. It became part of who I was. I started there in 1991 as a junior sales representative with a used Ford pickup and a borrowed suit that never quite fit right. Over the years, I earned promotions one customer at a time. Not because I was the smartest man in the room, because I returned phone calls, because I admitted mistakes, because I believed people remembered how you treated them long after they forgot your sales presentation. By the time I turned 59, I was Senior Vice President of Business Development. My office overlooked downtown Dallas, and my calendar stayed booked weeks in advance. But the title wasn't what made me proud. The relationships were. Some of my customers had been buying from me for over 20 years. I knew their grandchildren's names. They knew mine. For the previous 6 months, one relationship had consumed nearly every waking hour of my life. Liberty Aerospace Manufacturing in Phoenix. Landing Liberty meant more than adding another customer. It meant securing a 5-year agreement worth $240 million. For Titan, it was transformational. For me, it was the largest negotiation I'd ever handled. Every clause had been debated. Every delivery schedule had been revised. Every warranty had been questioned by attorneys who billed more per hour than I made in a day when I first started my career. By Sunday evening, we still weren't finished. At 7 o'clock, I kissed Janet goodbye, grabbed another cup of coffee from the kitchen, and headed into my home office in Plano. "I'll try not to be too late," I told her. She smiled. "You've been saying that for 6 months." She wasn't wrong. The Zoom meeting began at 7:30. Executives from Liberty filled one side of the screen. Their legal team occupied another. Our CFO joined from Chicago. Our engineering director called in from Denver. Hour after hour, we worked through final language. Around midnight, someone suggested postponing until Tuesday. I could see hesitation spreading across Liberty's board. Delay was dangerous. Another supplier had been chasing this contract for months. If we pause now, we might never get another chance. So I leaned forward. "Before we end tonight," I said, "let me ask you one question." The room went quiet. "If this were your company, would you rather sign with the lowest bidder or the partner who's answered every call you've made for the last 6 months?" Nobody spoke. I wasn't quoting numbers anymore. I was talking about trust. 20 minutes later, Liberty's chairwoman smiled. "I think we're ready to vote." At 4:02 a.m. Central Time, the agreement was approved. People clapped. Someone opened a bottle of champagne on the Phoenix side of the call. Our CFO grinned. "Mike," when he said, "you just made company history." I shut my laptop and finally allowed myself to breathe. I slept for maybe 90 minutes. When my alarm went off, it felt like I'd closed my eyes for 5 minutes. Janet found me sitting at the kitchen table, staring into a mug of coffee that had already gone cold. "You look terrible," she said. "I feel worse." She walked behind my chair and squeezed my shoulders. "Call in." "I can't." "Why? They'll want to celebrate." She gave me that look wives perfect after decades of marriage. "The company will survive one morning without you." I smiled. "I know." Then I picked up my car keys anyway. The rain had started before sunrise. Traffic heading south toward Dallas crawled almost immediately. The radio reported a multi-car accident farther ahead. Brake lights stretched across the highway like a string of red Christmas lights. I glanced at the dashboard clock every couple of minutes. 7:48, 7:55, 8:01. I called my assistant, Rachel. "Can you let Ethan know I'm stuck behind an accident?" "Already did." What did he say? There was a pause. He just said noted. Something about the way she answered made me uneasy. Still, I figured we'd laugh about it later. After all, I just helped secure the biggest deal Titan had ever signed. Surely nobody was worried about 6 minutes. I parked, grabbed my laptop bag, and hurried through the lobby doors. The first thing I noticed was how quiet everyone became. Then I saw Ethan standing beside the reception desk. His suit looked freshly pressed. Mine looked like I'd slept in it, which honestly wasn't far from the truth. He checked his watch before looking up. Good morning, Michael. Morning. You're late. Traffic accident on Central. Rachel called. I know. I waited for him to smile. He didn't. It's company leadership policy, he said loudly enough for half the lobby to hear. Executives arriving late without prior approval are subject to a $500 accountability penalty. I blinked. I'm sorry, what? You can authorize payroll to deduct the $500. He paused. Or you can turn in your badge. Someone behind me dropped a coffee cup. The sound echoed through the lobby. I looked around. Nobody moved. I looked back at Ethan. At 4 o'clock this morning, I said quietly, I finished negotiating Liberty Aerospace. I've already heard. I slept less than 2 hours. Congratulations. His voice stayed perfectly calm. But results don't exempt anyone from policy. For the first time in my career, I realized I wasn't talking to a leader. I was talking to a man who cared more about being obeyed than being respected. I could have argued. I could have demanded the board get involved. I could have reminded everyone standing there exactly who had spent 6 months earning the trust of Liberty Aerospace. Instead, I slowly unclipped my employee badge. The plastic made a soft clicking sound as I placed it on the reception counter. Ethan looked almost surprised. You understand? I nodded. I understand perfectly. I walked to my office without another word. My hands were shaking not from anger but from exhaustion. 35 years fit into one cardboard box more easily than I expected. A framed family photo, a Navy mug my team had given me after my father passed away, a stack of handwritten notebooks filled with customer names, birthdays, and little reminders that no CRM system could ever replace. Rachel stood quietly in the doorway. Tears filled her eyes. I'm so sorry. It's not your fault. She hugged me. I don't know what's happening here anymore. Take care of yourself, I told her. As I carried the box toward the elevator, one of our summer interns hurried over. His name was Tyler. He couldn't have been more than 20. Mr. Carter. I stopped. Thank you, he said, for helping me these last few weeks. I smiled. You won't remember every sales presentation. He nodded. But you'll remember how people treated you. The elevator doors opened. I stepped inside. Just before they closed, I looked across the lobby at Ethan one last time. You'll figure out who really closed that deal, I said. It just won't be today. The doors slid shut. At that moment, I thought I was leaving behind the career I'd spent 35 years building. I had no idea I was also leaving behind the biggest mistake Titan Industrial Solutions would ever make. The first week after I lost my job, I spent more time sitting at my kitchen table than I had in the previous 10 years combined. Every morning, I'd wake up at 6 out of habit, shave, pour myself a cup of coffee, and then realize there was nowhere I needed to be. That was the hardest part. Not losing the paycheck, not losing the title, losing the routine. For 35 years, somebody had needed me before 8 o'clock every morning. Suddenly, nobody did. Janet noticed before I did. On Thursday, she set a plate of scrambled eggs in front of me and slid the newspaper across the table. You've been reading the same article for 20 minutes. I looked down. She was right. I hadn't turned the page once. I guess I have. She reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. You don't have to pretend you're okay. That sentence nearly broke me. I'm 59, I said quietly. Who hires a 59-year-old executive these days? She smiled the same patient smile I'd fallen in love with 38 years earlier. The right company. I don't know if there is one. There is. She squeezed my hand. If there isn't, maybe it's time you build it. I laughed. Janet, I'm almost 60. So, people don't start over at my age. She tilted her head. They do when they don't have another choice. The practical problems showed up faster than the emotional ones. Health insurance, retirement contributions, the mortgage. Even though we'd been careful with money our whole lives, uncertainty has a way of making every expense feel twice as large. I canceled the golf trip I'd planned with 3 old Navy buddies, sold a vintage Harley I'd restored over 15 years, called our travel agent and postponed the Alaska cruise Janet and I had promised ourselves after I turned 60. Every decision made sense. None of them felt good. One evening I apologized. I'm sorry. Janet looked up from her crossword puzzle. For what? For dragging you into this. She actually laughed. Michael, we've been dragging each other through life since 1988. Then she pointed her pencil at me. And for the record, you didn't lose your job because you failed. That mattered more than she probably realized. Finding another executive position turned out to be exactly as difficult as I'd feared. Recruiters loved my resume. Until they met me. One company in Fort Worth flew me in for what they called a final conversation. The hiring manager couldn't have been older than 35. Everything seemed to be going well until he leaned back in his chair. So, he smiled politely. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? I almost laughed. Hopefully enjoying retirement. His smile disappeared. That's very honest. It was also your question. The interview ended 10 minutes later. I never heard from them again. Another recruiter called 2 weeks later. You've got tremendous experience. I thanked him. But there was always a but. Our client is looking for someone with a little more long-term runway. Translation, you're too old. Nobody actually says it. They don't have to. A month after leaving Titan, I made the mistake of driving past the headquarters. I told myself I was just taking a different route home. The truth, I wanted to see my old office one more time. The parking lot looked exactly the same. The landscaping crew was trimming the hedges. Employees hurried inside carrying laptops and coffee cups. Life had moved on. Mine hadn't. I parked across the street for a minute. From that distance, I could still make out the executive directory in the lobby. My name wasn't there anymore. 35 years. Removed in less than 35 minutes. I started the truck and drove away before anyone recognized me. A few days later, Ethan Brooks appeared on CNBC. Janet muted the television as soon as she saw him. Too late. I'd already heard enough. He stood in front of a giant Titan logo, smiling confidently. Our team's dedication made the Liberty Aerospace partnership possible. Our team. Interesting choice of words. Not once did he mention the months of negotiations. Not once did he mention the people who had actually done the work. He certainly didn't mention the man he'd fired 6 minutes after the contract was signed. I turned the television off. Janet looked at me carefully. You okay? I think so. You don't sound convinced. I'm trying not to become bitter. She nodded. Good. Because bitterness always hurts the person carrying it. 3 days later, my phone rang. Unknown Arizona number. I almost ignored it. Instead, I answered. This is Michael. Michael Carter. Yes. This is Sarah Whitmore. I sat up straighter. Sarah was Liberty Aerospace's chief procurement officer. The woman I'd spent 6 months negotiating with. I hope I'm not calling it a bad time. No, she hesitated. I just found out you left Titan. I didn't exactly leave. I heard. Silence settled between us. Finally, she sighed. I honestly thought it was some kind of rumor. It wasn't. I'm sorry. So am I. Then she asked a question I wasn't expecting. Can I ask you something? Of course. When we signed that agreement, yes. Who actually decided to terminate your employment? Our CEO. She didn't speak for several seconds. Finally, she said softly, I don't understand. Neither do I. Sarah surprised me again. You know why Liberty signed with Titan. I assume because we had the best proposal. No, we weren't the cheapest. I know. We weren't the fastest. I know. She laughed. You know why we signed? I hoped I did. We signed because every single time I called, you answered. I didn't say anything. She continued. My father owned a machine shop in Arizona. I didn't know that. He always told me, she paused, never buy from companies. Buy from people. I smiled despite myself. He sounds like a smart man. He would have liked you. Then came the question that changed everything. If you were independent, I frowned. What do you mean? If you started your own consulting firm? She spoke slowly. Would you still answer my calls? I laughed. Sarah, I don't even have a business. So, I don't even have business cards? Those are easy. I'm serious. So am I. Another pause. Then she said something I'll never forget. Michael, Titan has a contract. You have the relationship. After we hung up, I sat in complete silence. Janet walked into the room carrying laundry. You look like you've seen a ghost. I may have just seen a future. The next morning, I cleaned out our garage. Old paint cans, broken shelves, Christmas decorations. By lunchtime, I'd made enough room for a folding desk I'd found on Facebook Marketplace. The office chair came from Craigslist. The filing cabinet had belonged to Janet's father. Our daughter Emily built me a simple website over the weekend. It wasn't fancy. Actually, it looked terrible, but it was mine. I ordered inexpensive business cards. Michael Carter Consulting. Seeing my own name printed across the top felt strange, exciting, terrifying. All at once. The first month was painfully quiet. No clients, no income, just paperwork, business licenses, insurance forms, tax registrations. I spent more time talking to accountants than customers. One Tuesday afternoon, I looked at the checking account and seriously considered shutting everything down. This was a mistake, I told Janet. She looked up from paying bills. You've been open for 3 weeks. Exactly. I haven't made $1. She smiled. Michael, when you worked at Titan? Yes. How long did it take to earn Liberty Aerospace's trust? I thought about it. 6 months. So why are you expecting strangers to trust your new company after 3 weeks? I didn't have an answer. She kissed my forehead. Go back to work. So I did. I just didn't know that somewhere inside Titan the first cracks had already begun to appear. And before long, the people who had stayed silent would start calling me one by one. About 4 months after I walked out of Titan with a cardboard box under my arm, my phone started ringing more often. Not with job offers, with apologies. The first call came on a Tuesday afternoon while I was trying to figure out why my new accounting software kept rejecting an invoice. The caller ID read Tom Reynolds. I hadn't seen Tom in almost 3 years. He'd retired as Titan's chief operating officer after nearly 4 decades with the company. He was 66 now, living on a small ranch outside Weatherford with his wife, 2 horses, and if his Christmas cards were any indication, more grandchildren than he could keep track of. Mike, his voice sounded older than I remembered. Tom, how are you? I've been better. Something in his tone told me this wasn't a social call. You free for lunch tomorrow? Sure. I'd rather not do it over the phone. The next day, we met at a little barbecue place in Weatherford called Railhead Smokehouse. It wasn't fancy, but Tom had always believed important conversations happened better over brisket than in boardrooms. When I walked in, he was already sitting in a booth by the window. He stood up and hugged me. That surprised me. Tom wasn't much of a hugger. You've lost weight, he said. So have you. Mine was intentional. We both laughed. It was the first genuine laugh I'd had in weeks. After the waitress brought sweet tea and took our order, neither of us spoke for a moment. Tom stared at the table. Finally, he sighed. I owe you an apology. For what? For sitting in that boardroom while Ethan dismantled everything people like us spent 40 years building. I looked at him. You were already retired. I still had a voice. He rubbed his forehead. I just didn't use it. Tom reached into a leather folder and slid several pages across the table. I probably shouldn't have copied these. I looked down. Board meeting minutes, internal reports, executive summaries. None of them were marked confidential anymore. Tom explained they had been distributed to every board member before he retired. Read page 3. I did. My stomach tightened. The report described Liberty Aerospace as a strategic victory led by CEO Ethan Brooks, with support from the Business Development Department. Support. That one word erased 6 months of my life. Tom watched my face. He presented it that way from the beginning. I thought the board knew. They knew you worked on it. He paused. They didn't know you carried it. I closed the folder. I guess titles matter more than names. They do to some people. Then Tom leaned closer. That's not why I called. It isn't. No. He lowered his voice. Ethan has started replacing senior people. I heard. You haven't heard the half of it. He told me that within 3 months, 5 department heads over the age of 55 had either resigned or been pushed out. Officially, it was restructuring. Unofficially, everyone understood the message. Experienced employees cost too much. Young hires cost less. It looks good on quarterly reports, Tom said. At first. What happens later? You find out experience isn't an expense. It's an investment. That sounded exactly like something Tom would have said 20 years earlier. I wanted to feel vindicated. Instead, I felt sad. Some of those managers had been friends for decades. One had coached my son's little league team. Another had attended my daughter's wedding. This wasn't just business. It was people's lives. Tom must have seen the expression on my face. You're not smiling. Should I be? I figured after what Ethan did. I shook my head. I don't want people losing their jobs. I just wanted someone to learn something. Tom nodded slowly. I was hoping you'd say that. Over the next several weeks, more calls came. Rachel, my former assistant, checked in every Friday. She never complained directly, but little details slipped out. The executive floor feels different. How? Nobody talks. Another time she said, people leave exactly at 5 now. That's good, isn't it? She laughed. No, they're afraid if they stay late, Ethan will think they can't manage their time. That sounded exactly backward. When I worked there, people stayed because they believed in what they were building. Fear had replaced pride. Then Tyler called. the summer intern. Except he wasn't an intern anymore. Titan had hired him full-time after graduation. Mr. Carter, you can call me Michael now. I don't think I can. That made me smile. So, how's the job? There was a long silence. I don't know what I'm doing. Nobody does their first year. No. I mean, nobody knows what they're doing. What happened? They replaced 3 senior account managers in 1 month. Who's training you? Another silence. PowerPoint. I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. PowerPoint. They left us a folder. A folder. And 180 slides. I couldn't help it. I laughed again. Even Tyler started laughing. Finally, he said, I had a client ask me how long we'd supplied their company. What did you tell him? I said I'd check our database. What was the right answer? You knew his father. We both went quiet. No software could replace that. Business at Michael Carter Consulting was still slow, but it was finally moving. My first paying client was a family-owned manufacturer in Oklahoma that made hydraulic valves. The owner, Frank Delgado, had known me for almost 15 years. When I asked why he'd hired a one-man consulting firm instead of a national agency, he shrugged. Because I know where you'll be if I call on Saturday. That became my first invoice. Then another client came. Then another. Nothing huge, but enough to pay the bills. Enough to let Janet book the Alaska cruise again this time without telling me until she'd already made the deposit. We're going, she announced one evening. Can we afford it? She smiled. We can afford hope. Then something unexpected happened. Sarah Whitmore called again. Michael, you got a minute? Always. I've got a problem. My stomach tightened. What kind of problem? Tighten? She explained that after the contract had been signed, routine implementation meetings had become increasingly frustrating. Questions weren't being answered. Deadlines were slipping. People she'd worked with for months had disappeared. When I asked where someone went, what do they say? They're no longer with the company. How many times have you heard that? She sighed. Too many. Then she told me something I hadn't expected. I asked Ethan who replaced you. What did he say? He told me no one person could replace you. I smiled. That's surprisingly honest. She didn't laugh. He said your role had been divided among 4 younger managers. I leaned back in my chair. And I've met all 4. Another pause. They're trying. But they don't know our business. I didn't say a word. They know the contract. They don't know the customer. A week later, Tom called again. The board's getting nervous. About what? The stock's down. How much? Enough that people have started asking questions. He hesitated. And there's something else. What? They've finally started looking at who actually built Titan's biggest customer relationships. I looked out the garage window toward the little sign hanging over my desk. Michael Carter Consulting. 4 months earlier, I'd been afraid nobody would ever call me again. Now the company I'd devoted 35 years to was beginning to realize that contracts could be transferred on paper, but trust couldn't. And before long, the people who had ignored my voice were about to ask for it again. 6 months after I walked out of Titan, my phone rang just after 8 on a Thursday morning. I recognized the area code immediately. Dallas. The caller introduced herself as Nancy Holloway, Corporate Secretary for Titan's Board of Directors. I hadn't spoken to Nancy in years. She'd always been the kind of person who remembered birthdays, sent handwritten thank you notes, and somehow knew everyone's spouse by name. Good morning, Michael. Morning, Nancy. I hope I'm not interrupting. I was just finishing breakfast. There was a brief silence. The board would like to meet with you. I didn't answer right away. I understand that's probably unexpected, she continued. It is. The meeting would be confidential. I looked out the kitchen window. Janet was in the backyard trimming the rose bushes she'd planted after we bought the house nearly 30 years earlier. What exactly do they want? They'd like to understand what happened. I almost laughed. 6 months later, I'm afraid some questions took longer than they should have. When I hung up, Janet walked inside carrying gardening gloves. Who was it? The board. She raised an eyebrow. They finally woke up, apparently. What are you going to do? I honestly don't know. She poured herself a glass of iced tea before answering. If you don't go, she took a sip. Someone else tells your story. And if I do, you simply tell the truth. That was one of the things I'd always admired about Janet. She never complicated simple decisions. The meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday at Titan headquarters. Driving back there felt strangely familiar. The same exit. The same office buildings. The same Starbucks where I'd stopped hundreds of times before early meetings. For a moment, I almost pulled into the employee parking lot out of habit. Instead, I parked in the visitor section. Funny how quickly a place stops belonging to you. Nancy met me in the lobby. She smiled warmly. It's good to see you. You too. As we walked toward the executive floor, I noticed something immediately. The building felt quieter, not peaceful, cautious. People spoke in hushed voices. Several employees recognized me. Some nodded. Others looked away embarrassed. One young engineer whispered, "Good luck, Mr. Carter." I smiled. "Thanks." The boardroom looked exactly as I remembered. Long walnut table, leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Dallas. 12 directors sat around the table. Some I'd worked with for years. Others had joined after retiring from companies I'd only read about in business magazines. The chairman, Robert Hastings, stood as I entered. He was 72, a former manufacturing executive with a reputation for asking simple questions that usually uncovered complicated truths. He shook my hand. "Michael." "Robert, thank you for coming. I'm here because Nancy said you wanted the truth." "That's exactly why you're here." Nobody asked me to give a speech. Instead, Robert opened a notebook. "Let's start with Sunday evening." For the next hour, I simply answered questions. When did negotiations begin? Who attended? Who approved the final language? What time was the agreement signed? I wasn't trying to defend myself. I was just telling the story exactly as it happened. Then Robert asked, "Did you inform anyone you might be late Monday morning?" "Yes." I called my assistant. "What time?" I slid my phone records across the table. 7:54. Another director reviewed them quietly. "It checks out." Next came the emails. The Zoom invitation, meeting transcripts, revision history showing my comments on nearly every section of the contract. Sarah Whitmore's thank you email sent at 4:19 a.m. It read, "Michael, I appreciate your patience, professionalism, and persistence. Liberty looks forward to working with you." Robert read it twice. Then he looked up. "This wasn't copied to Ethan." "No." "Why not?" "Sarah sent it to the people she actually worked with." No one spoke. Then Robert asked the question I'd been waiting for. "Tell us about Monday morning." I described the traffic accident, the phone call to Rachel, walking through the lobby, the conversation with Ethan, the silence, the cardboard box. I didn't exaggerate anything. I didn't need to. The facts were uncomfortable enough. When I finished, Robert turned toward Titan's Vice President of Human Resources, Linda Foster. Linda looked exhausted. She hadn't met my eyes once since I'd entered the room. "Linda," Robert said calmly, "does Titan have an executive policy imposing a $500 financial penalty for arriving late?" She took a slow breath. "No." The room became perfectly still. Robert asked again, "Has Titan ever had such a policy?" "No." "Then explain." Linda folded her hands together. Approximately 2 months before Michael's termination, Mr. Brooks instructed HR to begin enforcing what he called an executive accountability program. Was it approved by the board? No. Was it approved by legal? No. Was it included in the employee handbook? No. So it was never official. Linda swallowed. Correct. Nobody raised their voice. Nobody slammed a fist on the table. That somehow made everything more powerful. Robert quietly wrote something in his notebook. Then he asked one final question. "Did Mr. Brooks have authority to terminate Michael Carter that morning?" Linda hesitated. "Not without board notification." "Was the board notified?" "No." The silence lasted almost 30 seconds. Then the large monitor at the end of the room came to life. Sarah Whitmore appeared from Liberty Aerospace's headquarters in Phoenix. She smiled when she saw me. "Good afternoon." Robert thanked her for joining. "We have one question." Sarah nodded. "We're trying to understand why Liberty selected Titan." She answered without hesitation. "We selected Michael Carter." A few directors exchanged glances. Sarah continued. "Titan manufactured excellent equipment, but companies don't build trust. People do." She looked directly into the camera. "Michael answered every call. He solved problems before we asked. He never promised something he couldn't deliver." Then came the sentence that changed the room. "Since Michael left," she paused, "we've lost confidence." One director leaned forward. "Are you saying Liberty intends to terminate the agreement?" Sarah chose her words carefully. "I'm saying we're reviewing every remaining phase." Another uncomfortable silence. Robert thanked her. The screen went dark. He closed his notebook. "Michael." "Yes." "If the board asked you to return." I smiled gently before he could finish. "I appreciate that." "But no." Several directors looked surprised. "I've already found a place where people value my work. I'd rather keep building it." Robert nodded slowly. "I was hoping you'd say that." He turned toward the rest of the board. "We'll need a private executive session." Nancy walked over. "Michael, if you don't mind waiting in the conference room next door." "Of course." For nearly 40 minutes, I sat alone with a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. I wasn't nervous. Whatever happened inside that room was no longer my decision. I had finally told my story. That was enough. Eventually, Nancy opened the door. "They're ready." When I stepped back into the boardroom, Ethan Brooks wasn't there. Neither was his laptop. Neither was his leather briefcase. Robert stood. "The board has voted unanimously to terminate Ethan Brooks as Chief Executive Officer effective immediately." He paused. "The decision was based on unauthorized personnel actions, material misrepresentations to the board, and a sustained failure of executive leadership." I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't smile. The room was simply quiet. As I left the building a few minutes later, I passed Ethan in the parking garage. For the first time since I'd met him, he wasn't wearing confidence. He was carrying a cardboard box. He looked at me. I looked back. Neither of us said a word. Sometimes silence says everything that needs to be said. A year after I carried that cardboard box out of Titan, my mornings looked completely different. I still woke up before sunrise. Some habits never leave you. The difference was I no longer woke up because I had to. I woke up because I wanted to. Instead of driving through rush hour traffic toward downtown Dallas, I'd pour a cup of coffee, step onto the back patio, and watch the sun come up over our neighborhood in Plano. Janet usually joined me a few minutes later, still wearing her old Texas A&M sweatshirt. "You know," she said one morning, "you're smiling before your first cup of coffee." "I am. You never used to." I hadn't noticed. For years, every morning had started with deadlines, conference calls, or a flight to catch. Now, the first few minutes of my day belonged to me. I hadn't realized how much I'd missed that. Michael Carter Consulting had grown far beyond the folding table in our garage. We'd leased a modest office in Richardson, not one of those shiny glass towers, just a clean 2-story brick building with a bakery across the parking lot. Our sign wasn't impressive. It didn't need to be. The people inside were. There were 7 of us now. Frank, a retired operations manager who knew more about supply chains than anyone I'd ever met. Lisa, a former customer service director who could calm an angry client in under 5 minutes. Tom, yes, the same Tom Reynolds, worked with us 2 days a week after deciding retirement was a little too quiet. Rachel had joined us 3 months after leaving Titan. She never told me exactly what made her resign. She didn't have to. And then there was Tyler, the intern who had thanked me on my last day. He'd stayed at Titan for another 6 months before calling me. "I think I'm learning more about office politics than business," he'd admitted. "You still interested in learning sales?" "I've always been interested. So come learn." He accepted before I finished the sentence. Watching him grow reminded me of myself at 24, eager, hardworking, convinced every problem had a complicated solution. Most of the time it didn't. Most of the time, people just wanted someone to answer the phone and keep their word. One thing I promised myself was that I would never build a company around fear. Every Monday morning, we held a 30-minute meeting. No speeches, no corporate slogans, no charts full of buzzwords. Just coffee, breakfast, tacos, and a conversation. How are the clients doing? Where do you need help? Who had a good week? Who had a rough one? That was usually enough. One rainy Thursday, Tyler rushed into the office looking embarrassed. "I'm sorry." I looked up from my desk. "What happened?" "I overslept." He glanced at the clock. "I know I'm 15 minutes late." The entire office became quiet. I recognized the look on his face immediately. I'd worn the same expression once. He was waiting for a lecture, or worse. Instead, I smiled. "Did you eat breakfast?" He blinked. "Good." I handed him $20. "Go across the parking lot and get yourself a breakfast sandwich." He stared at me. "Seriously? Seriously? But I'm late." "You are. I should probably be punished." I leaned back in my chair. "Tyler." "Yes." "Were you late because you don't care?" "No." "Were you late because you were lazy?" "No, sir." "You've been here early almost every day for 6 months." "Yes." "Then today isn't your character. It's just your morning." The office stayed silent. Finally, Frank laughed. "I wish somebody had told my first boss that." Everyone smiled. Tyler came back 10 minutes later carrying a paper bag and looking like someone had just lifted 50 pounds off his shoulders. That moment meant more to me than closing another contract. Because companies don't remember policies. People remember how you make them feel. Business continued to grow, but not because we chased every opportunity. In fact, we turned some work down. If a potential client treated our employees poorly during the first meeting, we politely declined. Rachel thought I was crazy the first time I did it. "They're offering a lot of money." "I know. We could really use this account." "I know. So why say no?" I smiled. "Because one bad client can cost you 10 good employees." She nodded slowly. "I never thought about it that way." Neither did I. Not until I worked somewhere that forgot. Late one Friday afternoon, my receptionist buzzed my office. Michael? Yeah. There's someone here asking to see you. Who is it? She hesitated. Ethan Brooks. I sat quietly for a few seconds. Send him in. He looked different. Not dramatically. Just tired. He wasn't wearing an expensive tailored suit anymore. No designer watch. No polished confidence. Just a navy sport coat and a manila folder tucked under his arm. Hello, Michael. Hello, Ethan. He remained standing. I won't take much of your time. Have a seat. He didn't. Instead, he looked around the office. You built something nice. Thank you. Another long silence settled between us. Finally, he spoke. I owe you an apology. I waited. I thought leadership meant never making exceptions. He looked down. I confused discipline with respect. There it was. Not a perfect apology, not a dramatic one. Just an honest sentence. I hurt a lot of people. Yes, I can't change that. No, he nodded. I don't expect forgiveness. I thought for a moment before answering. You know, my father served in the Navy. Ethan looked up. He used to tell me something. The hardest person to salute is the one you don't respect. I smiled gently. I finally understand what he meant. Ethan let out a quiet breath. I think I do too. He extended his hand. I shook it. Not because everything was suddenly okay. Not because the past had disappeared. But because I didn't want to carry it any longer. After he left, Tyler walked into my office. Everything okay? Yeah. What did he want? To apologize. Did it help? I looked out the window. It helped him. Tyler laughed. What about you? I stopped needing revenge a long time ago. A few weeks before Christmas, a handwritten card arrived from Liberty Aerospace. Inside was a short note from Sarah Whitmore. It read, Michael, thank you for reminding us that trust isn't built during negotiations. It's built in the ordinary moments that come long before the contract is signed. I read it twice before setting it on my desk. That note meant more to me than any award I'd ever received. Because when I looked back on everything that had happened, I realized something. The biggest victory wasn't watching Ethan lose his job. It wasn't starting my own company. It wasn't even proving that I had been right. The real victory was discovering that my value had never depended on a business card, an office, or a title. It had always lived in the way I treated people. That was something no company could ever take away. If this story reminds you of someone who gave years of their life to a job, I hope it also reminds you that experience, integrity, and kindness never go out of style. I genuinely love to hear your own story in the comments. And if you enjoy stories about second chances and quiet victories, thank you for spending your time with me.